The sun burned red over the dead lands of Arizona, as Jake Morrison stood on the wooden watchtower and looked out at what used to be America. The year was 2387, but it might as well have been 1887 for all the good their old technology did them now. The great solar flare of 2341 had killed everything that ran on power and left the world as broken as a dropped plate. Jake pulled his hat down low to block the harsh light that seemed to cut right through a man these days. Below him, the settlement of Haven Ridge spread out like a small town from the Old West. Wooden buildings lined a dusty main street where people walked instead of riding in cars that would never run again. Children played with sticks and stones while their parents worked with hand tools to grow what little food they could coax from the poisoned soil. The settlement had maybe 200 people on a good day, but that number kept getting smaller. Some died from the sickness that came from eating bad water. Others just packed up and headed west looking for something better that probably did not exist. The smart ones stayed close to the old mine where they could dig deep enough to find water that did not taste. Like metal and death, Jake was 35 years old and had been leading these people for the past 3 years ever since the fever took old Pete Collins, who founded the place. Jake never wanted to be a leader, but when people are dying and scared, they look to whoever seems strong enough to keep them alive one more day. He had broad shoulders and steady hands that could fix most anything that broke. More important, he had Thunder. Thunder stood in the corral below, looking like something out of a dream that belonged to better times. The black stallion was bigger than any horse Jake had ever seen, with a coat that shined like polished stone even in the harsh light. Thunder came from Mustang blood that somehow survived when most animals died after the flare. The horse was fast as the wind and strong enough to carry a man all day without getting tired. People said Thunder was the most valuable thing in Haven Ridge, and Jake knew they were right. The horse was worth more than all their water and food put together because Thunder meant they could send riders to trade with other settlements. Without the horse, they would be stuck, waiting to die like so many other places they had heard about on the old radio that sometimes picked up signals from far away. Jake climbed down from the watchtower and walked over to where his second-in-command, Mary Foster, was checking the water barrels. Mary was a tough woman in her 40s who had been a nurse before the world ended. She kept people healthy as best she could and never complained about how hard things were, even when Jake could see the worry in her dark eyes. "We got maybe 2 weeks of good water left," Mary said without looking up from her work. "The well is running low again, and what comes up tastes worse every day." Jake nodded and looked toward the hills where the Kethvar had been spotted last week. The aliens had shown up about 5 years after the flare, when Earth was too weak to fight back. Nobody knew where they came from or what they really wanted, but they took things and killed people and burned anything they could not use. The Kethvar looked like giant insects walking on 2 legs with green skin that seemed to move like it was alive. They had weapons that shot light and could kill a man from far away. "Any word from the scouts?" Jake asked. "Nothing since yesterday," Mary replied. "Could mean they found trouble or could mean they found nothing to report." "Hard to say." Jake walked over to Thunder and ran his hand along the horse's neck. The animal was warm and solid and real in a world where too many things seemed like shadows of what used to be. Thunder turned his head and looked at Jake with eyes that seemed to understand more than any horse should. Sometimes Jake thought the horse was smarter than most of the people in town. "What do you think, boy?" Jake asked quietly. "Think we can make it through another winter?" Thunder made a soft sound and pushed his nose against Jake's shoulder. The horse had never let anyone else ride him and barely tolerated other people getting close. But with Jake, he was gentle as a lamb and loyal as a dog. People said it was magic, but Jake thought it was just trust. In a world where everything else had failed, trust was about the only thing left that had any value. The sound of running feet made Jake turn around. Young Billy Harper came racing down the street with his face red from running hard in the heat. Billy was maybe 16 and worked as a messenger because he was fast and knew how to keep his mouth shut about things that needed staying quiet. "Jake," Billy called out. "Something coming in from the east." Jake felt his stomach tighten. Nothing good ever came from the east, where the dead cities lay like broken teeth against the sky. He grabbed Thunder's reins and swung up into the saddle in one smooth motion. The horse seemed to sense trouble and started moving before Jake even touched the reins. They rode fast to the east, edge of town where a small crowd had gathered, on top of the old gas station. They gave the best view of the flat land beyond. Jake could see dust rising in the distance but could not make out what was causing it. Could be wind, could be animals, could be Kethvar coming to take what little they had left. "Give me the scope." Jake said to Sam Butler, who ran the trading post. Sam handed over the old telescope that was one of the few pieces of technology that still worked after the flare. Jake put it to his eye and adjusted the focus until the distant shape became clear. What he saw made his blood run cold. A figure was walking toward them across the desert. It moved wrong, like it was hurt or sick. As it got closer, Jake could see it was not human. The thing was tall and thin with skin that looked like polished copper in the sunlight. It wore clothes that reminded Jake of pictures he had seen of Indian warriors, but made from materials that seemed to shimmer and change color as it moved. "What is it?" Mary asked from beside him. "Do not know," Jake replied, "but it is not Kethvar and it is not human. Looks like it is hurt bad." The alien kept walking toward them, even though it was clear the thing could barely stay on its feet. Every few steps it would stumble and almost fall, but then catch itself and keep going. It was still maybe a mile away, but Jake could tell it was heading straight for Haven Ridge, like it knew exactly where it was going. "Could be a trap," Sam said. "Could be bait to get us to come out where the Kethvar can pick us off." Jake handed the telescope back and thought about what to do. Every choice seemed dangerous, but doing nothing might be the most dangerous choice of all. The alien was dying, and everyone could see it. Maybe it had information they needed. Maybe it had weapons or medicine or knowledge that could help them survive. Or maybe it would bring death down on all of them. Thunder stamped his feet and shook his head like he was trying to tell Jake something important. The horse was looking toward the approaching alien with his ears forward and his whole body alert, but not afraid. Jake trusted Thunder's judgment more than he trusted his own most days. "Get everyone inside and bar the doors," Jake told Mary. "I'm going to meet our visitor." Jake rode Thunder slowly across the desert sand toward the strange figure that stumbled through the heat, like a man walking in his sleep. The closer he got, the more details he could see, and none of them made sense. The alien was tall as a man, but built different, with longer arms and legs that seemed too thin to hold up its body. Its skin was not just copper-colored, but seemed to have light moving under it like water flowing beneath ice. The clothes were the strangest part. They looked like the buckskin and beadwork Jake had seen in old pictures of Apache warriors, but the materials were wrong. The leather seemed to shift colors from brown to gold to deep red as the light hit it. The beads were not glass or stone, but something that glowed soft like stars. Feathers hung from a band around the alien's head, but they moved in patterns that had nothing to do with the wind. When Jake got close enough to see the alien's face, he had to fight not to turn, thunder around, and ride back to town as fast as they could go. The features were human enough to be familiar, but wrong enough to be frightening. The eyes were too large and completely black, like looking into deep water at night. The nose was narrow and the mouth was too wide. But there was something in the way the alien held itself that reminded Jake of old warriors he had known before the world ended. The alien saw Jake coming and stopped walking. It raised one hand in what might have been a greeting, or might have been a sign of surrender. Dark liquid that could have been blood stained the front of its strange clothes, and more dripped from a wound in its side. Whatever had hurt this thing had done it recent and done it bad. Jake stopped Thunder about 20 feet away and kept his hand near the rifle that hung from his saddle. The alien looked at him with those black eyes, and when it spoke, its voice was rough like gravel in a stream. "Help," the alien said in English that sounded wrong coming from that mouth. "Please help Running Wolf." So it had a name and it could talk. Jake tried to figure out if this was good news or bad news, and decided he did not have enough information to make that choice yet. The alien took a step forward and almost fell. Only by grabbing onto a dead tree branch did it manage to stay on its feet. "You are hurt," Jake said. "Kethvar," Running Wolf replied. "They hunt, they kill. Running Wolf runs, but not fast enough." That got Jake's attention quick. If the Kethvar were chasing this alien, they might be close behind. He looked back toward the hills, but saw no dust clouds or movement. Maybe they had given up the hunt, or maybe they were being careful about approaching human territory. "Why do the Kethvar hunt you?" Jake asked. Running Wolf tried to answer, but instead of words, he made a sound like air leaking from a tire. More of the dark blood flowed from his mouth, and he dropped to his knees in the sand. Jake could see the alien was dying, and probably had been dying since before he started walking toward Haven Ridge. Thunder made a soft sound and took a step forward without being told. The horse was looking at Running Wolf with what Jake could only describe as sympathy. It was the same look Thunder got when he saw a hurt animal that needed help. Jake made his decision. He climbed down from the saddle and walked slowly toward the dying alien. Running Wolf looked up at him with eyes that were getting dim but still held intelligence and something that might have been hope. My people call me Jake, he said. Can you ride? Running Wolf tried to speak but could only nod. Jake helped him to his feet and was surprised by how light the alien felt. The body was all bone and muscle with no extra weight anywhere. Jake could feel heat coming off Running Wolf's skin like he had a bad fever. Getting the alien onto Thunder's back was not easy. Running Wolf was weak and kept sliding to one side or the other. But Thunder stood perfectly still and even lowered himself a little to make it easier. When Running Wolf was finally seated, Jake climbed up behind him and turned the horse toward home. The ride back to Haven Ridge took longer than usual because Jake had to keep Thunder moving slow to keep Running Wolf from falling off. The alien leaned back against Jake's chest and Jake could feel him getting weaker with every step the horse took. By the time they reached the edge of town, Running Wolf was barely conscious. People came out of buildings as they rode down the main street. Jake could see fear and anger in their faces. These were folks who had lost family and friends to alien attacks. Seeing Jake bring one of the creatures into their safe place was not something they were happy about. Mary Foster met them at the door of the building they used as a hospital. She took one look at Running Wolf and shook her head. "Jake, what are you thinking?" she asked. "That thing could be diseased or dangerous or both." "It is dying, Mary," Jake replied. "And it might have information we need about the Kethvar." Mary did not look convinced, but she helped Jake carry Running Wolf inside and put him on the table they used for treating injuries. In the better light, Jake could see just how bad the alien's wounds were. Something had torn through his side and left jagged cuts that went deep. The blood was darker than human blood and did not clot the same way. "I do not know how to treat something like this," Mary said. "I do not even know if human medicine will work on alien biology." Dang. Wolf's eyes opened and he looked directly at Jake. When he spoke, his voice was so quiet Jake had to lean down close to hear the words. "Not much time," Running Wolf whispered. "Must tell." "Must warn? Tell me what?" Jake asked. "Kethvar come soon. Big force. They know about humans now. They know you fight back." That was bad news, but not unexpected. The Kethvar had been testing human settlements for months now. Small attacks to see how well people could defend themselves. It made sense they would eventually mount a larger assault. "How many?" Jake asked. "Many ships. Many warriors. They come from the sky like locusts." Running Wolf tried to sit up but fell back onto the table. His breathing was getting shallow and quick. Jake could see the alien was fighting to stay alive long enough to deliver his message. "Why do you tell us this?" Jake asked. "Why warn humans about your enemies?" Running Wolf looked confused for a moment, like the question did not make sense to him. Then he seemed to understand what Jake was asking. "Kethvar not my people," he said. "Kethvar enemy of all who live free. Running Wolf's people fight them long time across many worlds." "Your people are warriors?" Jake asked. "We are the people of the Thundering Hooves," Running Wolf replied. "We ride the star paths. We carry the old ways to new places. We fight the darkness that eats light." The words were strange, but Jake thought he understood what the alien was trying to tell him. Running Wolf's people were not like the Kethvar. They were fighters, but they fought for something instead of just fighting to destroy. "Where are your people now?" Jake asked. Running Wolf closed his eyes, and for a moment Jake thought he had died. But then the alien spoke again, and his voice was so sad it made Jake's chest hurt to hear it. "Gone," Running Wolf whispered. "Ship broken. Wind Dancer dead. Running Wolf alone." Jake did not know what Wind Dancer was, but he could tell it meant something important to the dying alien. Running Wolf reached up with one thin hand and touched something that hung around his neck. It was a stone or crystal that seemed to have light trapped inside it like a firefly in a jar. "Cannot go to the ancestors without mount," Running Wolf said. "Cannot cross the sky roads alone. Will wander in darkness forever." Mary looked at Jake with questions in her eyes, but Jake was starting to understand. Running Wolf was talking about death and what came after death. His people believed they needed their mounts to travel to whatever came next. "Without Wind Dancer, he would be lost. What can we do?" Jake asked, even though he was not sure he wanted to know the answer. Running Wolf opened his black eyes one more time and looked directly at Jake. When he spoke, his voice was stronger than it had been since they brought him inside. "Give Running Wolf a mount to carry him home to the stars," he said. "Give freely what is most precious, and the people will remember. Give with honor, and honor will return like the dawn." Jake felt his stomach drop as he realized what the alien was asking for. There was only one mount in Haven Ridge worthy of carrying a warrior to whatever came after death. Thunder was the only horse for 100 miles in any direction. Thunder was their hope and their future, and their connection to the world that used to be. Running Wolf was asking for the one thing Jake could not possibly give. Jake stared at the dying alien and felt like someone had just asked him to cut off his own arm. Thunder was not just a horse to the people of Haven Ridge. The stallion was their lifeline to the outside world, and their symbol that humanity could still be strong and free, even in a broken world. Without Thunder, they would be trapped in their little settlement waiting for death to come calling. "You do not understand what you are asking," Jake said quietly. Running Wolf turned his head to look at Jake, and those black eyes seemed to see right through him. Running Wolf understands more than human thinks. The black horse with lightning in his heart is precious beyond measure. He carries the spirit of the free people who ran wild across the grasslands before the sky burned. Jake felt a chill run down his spine. How could this alien know about Thunder's bloodline, or the old stories about the Mustangs that roamed the American plains before civilization tamed them? How could he know things that Jake barely knew himself? "My grandmother told me stories about horses like Thunder," Jake said. "Horses that ran free before fences and roads broke up the wild country. But that was a long time ago." "Time is a circle, not a line," Running Wolf replied. "What was will be again when the wheel turns." The people of the Thundering Hooves remember all the stories from all the worlds. We carry them in our hearts like seeds waiting for spring. Mary Foster had been listening to this conversation with growing alarm. She stepped forward and put her hand on Jake's shoulder. "Jake, you are not seriously thinking about this," she said. "That horse is the only thing keeping us alive. Without Thunder, we cannot trade with other settlements. We cannot send for help if the Kethavar attack. We will be completely cut off." Jake knew Mary was right, but something in Running Wolf's words had touched a place deep inside him that he did not even know existed. The alien was talking about honor and tradition and the kind of courage that his grandmother had told him about in stories of the old Apache warriors who would rather die fighting than live on their knees. "Tell me about your people," Jake said to Running Wolf. "Tell me about the Thundering Hooves." Running Wolf closed his eyes, and for a moment his breathing got easier, like talking about his people gave him strength. Long ago, when Earth was young, the first riders came from the stars. They saw the red people who lived in harmony with the land, and the four-legged ones who carried them swift as wind. They saw courage and wisdom and the warrior spirit that burns bright even in dark times. Jake leaned closer to listen. Mary tried to pull him away, but he shook her off gently. The first riders knew great darkness was coming to the galaxy. They knew the Kethavar would spread like poison across the star paths, killing everything that lived free and wild. So they offered the bravest of the red people a choice: stay on Earth and face the coming darkness alone, or come to the stars and carry the warrior spirit to all the worlds that needed protecting. "And some went with them?" Jake asked. "Many went," Running Wolf said. "They took their horses and their medicine and their songs. They learned to ride the sky paths between worlds. They became the people of the Thundering Hooves, and for thousands of years they fought to keep the darkness from eating the light." Jake thought about this and tried to picture Apache warriors riding horses between the stars, fighting alien monsters. It sounded like something from a crazy dream, but Running Wolf spoke about it like it was simple truth. "Where are they now?" Jake asked. "Scattered across the far worlds," Running Wolf replied. "Always fighting. Always retreating. The Kethavar are too many and grow stronger every year. The people lose ground and lose warriors and lose hope." Running Wolf opened his eyes again, and Jake could see pain there that had nothing to do with his physical wounds. This was the pain of a soldier who had watched his people slowly losing a war that had been going on for centuries. "But there is something else," Running Wolf said. "Something the Kethavar do not know." The old shamans spoke of a prophecy. They said when the darkness seemed strongest and hope seemed lost, the warrior spirit would return to the birth world. Earth children would remember the old ways and join the fight against the night. Jake felt his heart beating faster. "You think that is happening now?" Earth suffered and grew strong. Earth children learned to live without the soft things that made them weak. They learned to fight and to sacrifice and to honor the old contracts between human and horse. When Running Wolf saw the black stallion with lightning in his eyes, he knew the time had come. Mary made an angry sound and stepped between Jake and the alien. "This is crazy talk, Jake. You cannot risk everyone's lives based on some alien fairy tale about prophecies and star riders." Jake looked at Mary and saw real fear in her eyes. She was afraid he would do something stupid and get them all killed, but she was also afraid of something else. She was afraid he might be right. "There is more," Running Wolf said. His voice was getting weaker again, but he forced the words out. "The old places on Earth still hold power. the sacred springs that the ancestors blessed before they went to the stars. Pure water that can heal the poisoned land and make the dead places live again. That got Jake's full attention. Clean water was worth more than gold or weapons or anything else they could imagine. If Running Wolf knew where to find springs that had not been poisoned by the solar flare, it could save not just Haven Ridge but maybe all the human settlements in the southwest. Where? Jake asked. The contract must be honored first, Running Wolf replied. The warrior must have his mount to cross over. Only then will the ancestors share their gifts with the Earth Children. Jake felt trapped between impossible choices. If he gave thunder to Running Wolf, the people of Haven Ridge might die of thirst or starvation within the year. But if he refused, he might be throwing away the chance to save not just his settlement, but all of humanity. How do I know you are telling the truth? Jake asked. Running Wolf reached for the glowing stone that hung around his neck. With shaking fingers, he pulled it over his head and held it out to Jake. Take this. When Running Wolf crosses over the stone, we'll show you the sacred places, but only if the contract is honored. Only if the gift is given freely. Jake took the stone and immediately felt warmth spread through his palm. The crystal seemed alive, and he could swear he heard distant sounds like thunder or horses running across hard ground. For just a moment he thought he saw images in the stone's depths. Green valleys full of clear water, horses with starlight in their manes, warriors riding across an endless sky. Jake, do not do this, Mary pleaded. Think about what you are risking. Think about all the people counting on you. Jake looked around the room at the faces watching him. Some showed fear. Others showed anger. A few showed something that might have been hope. These were good people who had followed him because they trusted him to keep them alive. How could he bet their lives on the word of a dying alien? But then he thought about his grandmother, and the stories she had told him about honor and sacrifice and doing the right thing, even when it cost more than you could afford to pay. He thought about thunder and the trust in the horse's eyes. He thought about all the children who would grow up in a poisoned world unless someone was brave enough to take a chance on something impossible. The Kethvar are coming anyway, Jake said quietly. Running Wolf said they know about us now. They will attack with everything they have whether we help him or not. Then we need thunder to escape when they do, Mary replied. Where would we run? The whole world is dying. Maybe it is time to stop running and start fighting back. Jake walked to the window and looked out at Thunder standing in the corral. The stallion was looking back at him like he knew something important was about to happen. The horse's black coat gleamed in the afternoon sun and his mane moved in the hot wind like he was already running free. Running Wolf made a soft sound that might have been pain or might have been something else. When Jake turned back to look at him, the alien's eyes were starting to close. Not much time left, Running Wolf whispered. Choose quickly, human. Choose with honor. Jake held the glowing stone in his hand and felt its warmth pulse like a heartbeat. Outside, Thunder stamped his feet and called out with a sound that carried across the desert like rolling thunder. The choice was impossible, but Jake realized he had already made it the moment he decided to help a dying stranger, instead of leaving him to die alone in the sand. Jake walked out of the makeshift hospital while Mary called his name, and the other people of Haven Ridge watched with shocked faces. Some tried to follow him, but he held up his hand for them to stay back. This was something he had to do alone. Thunder was waiting in the corral like he knew what was coming. The stallion's ears were forward and his dark eyes held an intelligence that always made Jake feel like the horse understood things that humans missed. When Jake opened the gate, Thunder walked to him without being called and pushed his nose against Jake's chest. I know, boy, Jake said quietly. I know this does not make sense, but sometimes a man has to do what feels right in his heart, even when his head tells him he is making a mistake. Thunder made a soft sound and stood perfectly still while Jake put on the bridle and saddle. The leather was old but well cared for, and the silver buckles caught the late afternoon light. Jake's grandmother had given him this saddle before. She died, and she had told him it once belonged to a real Apache warrior who rode with Geronimo. The crowd followed. Jake back to the hospital, but they kept their distance. He could hear angry whispers and someone crying, but he did not turn around to look. If he stopped to think about what he was doing, he might lose his nerve and Running Wolf would die dishonored and alone. Inside the hospital, Running Wolf was barely breathing. His copper-colored skin had gone pale and the light under it was flickering like a candle in the wind. Mary stood beside the table with tears in her eyes and her hands clenched into fists. Jake, please, she said one more time. There has to be another way. Maybe there is, Jake replied. But we do not have time to find it. He walked to Running Wolf and gently shook the alien's shoulder. Those black eyes opened slowly and focused on Jake's face with difficulty. "Running Wolf," Jake said. "Can you stand? Can you walk to your mount?" The alien smiled, and it was the first time Jake had seen him look truly peaceful. The human chooses honor over safety. The ancestors will sing of this day. With Jake's help, Running Wolf managed to sit up and then to stand. He was weak as a newborn colt, but there was strength coming back into his eyes. Jake helped him walk outside where Thunder waited in the golden light of the setting sun. The entire population of Haven Ridge had gathered to watch. Men and women and children all stood in silent groups along the dusty street. Some looked angry. Others looked sad. A few looked proud. But all of them understood they were seeing something that would change everything. Thunder stood perfectly still while Jake helped Running Wolf onto the stallion's back. The alien sat forward and took the reins in his thin hands. He looked down at Jake with eyes that seemed to hold starlight. "Why?" Running Wolf asked. "Why does the human give what is most precious?" Jake thought about the question and realized he did not have a simple answer. He was giving away their hope and their future for a stranger who might be lying about everything, but something deep in his soul told him this was right. This was what his grandmother would have wanted him to do. This was what Thunder would have chosen if horses could make such choices. "My grandmother told me that a warrior's spirit rides eternal," Jake said. "She said the greatest honor is to help another warrior find his way home." Running Wolf nodded and reached into his shirt. He pulled out a small leather pouch decorated with beads and feathers. "This is medicine from the old world, sacred herbs that grow only in the high places where the spirits walk. Mix them with water and drink when the moon is dark. They will show you true visions." Jake took the pouch and felt warmth flow from it into his hands. "What kind of visions?" "You will see what was and what will be. You will see the paths between the stars and the places where warriors go when they cross over. You will understand why this gift matters more than you know." Running Wolf looked down at Thunder and spoke words in a language that sounded like wind through canyon rocks. The horse's ears twitched and he turned his head to look at the alien with what seemed like understanding. "I have told him he carries a warrior home," Running Wolf said. "He knows his duty now." Thunder began to walk forward without any signal from his rider. The stallion moved with purpose and dignity, like he was leading a funeral procession for a great chief. The crowd parted to let them through, and people removed their hats as the horse and rider passed. They walked to the edge of town where the desert began and the old world ended. Running Wolf sat straight in the saddle despite his wounds and looked every inch the warrior he claimed to be. Thunder stopped and stood like a statue while the alien raised the glowing stone above his head. "People of the earth," Running Wolf called out in a voice that carried clearly across the still air. "Hear the words of the people of the thundering hooves. You have shown honor to a dying warrior. You have given freely what could not be replaced. The ancestors have witnessed this gift and they will remember." The stone in Running Wolf's hand began to glow brighter. Light poured from it like water and seemed to flow into Thunder's black coat. For a moment the horse seemed to shimmer and become something more than just an animal. Jake could swear he saw lightning flickering in Thunder's mane and starfire in his eyes. "The contract is sealed," Running Wolf said. "What is given in honor will return sevenfold. What is shared with love will multiply like grain scattered on good ground." Running Wolf's voice was getting weaker, but he forced out a few more words. "Remember this day, Earth children. Remember that courage shared becomes courage doubled. Remember that the warrior spirit never truly dies." The alien slumped forward and the glowing stone fell from his fingers to land in the sand at Thunder's feet. The light faded and Running Wolf was still. Thunder stood motionless for a long moment, then slowly lowered his head to touch the alien's hand with his nose. Jake walked forward and picked up the stone. It was warm but no longer glowing with inner light. Running Wolf was dead, but his face was peaceful, like he had finally found the rest he had been seeking. Thunder raised his head and looked at Jake with eyes that seemed different somehow. "Older maybe, wiser. What do we do now?" Mary asked from behind him. Jake did not answer right away. He was looking at the stone in his hand and thinking about the medicine pouch in his pocket and the promise of sacred springs hidden somewhere in the wasteland. He was thinking about Kethavar armies coming from the sky and human settlements scattered and defenseless across the dying continent. "Now we bury him with honor," Jake said finally. "And we wait to see what dawn brings." That night Jake sat alone on his porch and held the stone in his hands, while the desert wind whispered through the empty streets of Haven Ridge. The stone felt warm, and sometimes he thought he could hear distant sounds like hoofbeats or singing or thunder rolling across an Endless sky. In his pocket, the medicine pouch seemed to pulse with its own rhythm like a second heartbeat. Tomorrow, when the moon went dark, he would mix the herbs with water and drink them, and see whatever visions Running Wolf had promised. Tonight he could only wait and wonder if he had just saved his people or doomed them all. Thunder stood in the corral looking out at the desert with his ears forward like he was listening for something, only he could hear. Sometimes the stallion would lift his head and call out with a sound that echoed off the hills and made the hair on Jake's arms stand up. It sounded like a challenge or a greeting or maybe both. Jake closed his eyes and tried to sleep, but his dreams were full of starlight and running horses and warriors riding across skies that had no end. In his dreams he heard drums beating and voices singing in languages he did not know but somehow understood. When he woke before dawn, the stone in his hand was glowing soft as moonlight and thunder was gone. Jake woke to the sound of the earth trembling. At first he thought it might be another earthquake, like the ones that had shaken the ground after the solar flare. But this was different. This had rhythm to it like a giant heartbeat or distant drums. He rolled off his cot and grabbed his rifle from beside the door. Outside, the sky was just starting to turn from black to gray, and the air was still cool from the night. The trembling was getting stronger, and now he could hear something else mixed in with it. A sound like wind through a canyon, but deeper and more alive. "Jake," Mary's voice called from across the street. "Something is coming!" Jake ran toward the watchtower while other people stumbled out of their homes, rubbing sleep from their eyes. The ground was shaking hard enough now that dust fell from the wooden buildings and loose objects rattled on shelves. Whatever was making this sound was big and getting closer. Billy Harper was already up in the watchtower with the telescope pressed to his eye. His face was white as paper and his hands were shaking as he tried to keep the scope steady. "What do you see?" Jake called as he climbed the ladder. "I do not know," Billy replied. "It looks like a storm, but storms do not make the ground shake like this." Jake took the telescope and pointed it toward the east where the sound seemed to be coming from. What he saw made his breath catch in his throat and his heart start beating like a war drum. The horizon was dark with moving shapes. At first, Jake thought it might be a dust storm rolling in from the desert. But as he adjusted the focus, he could see this was something else entirely. The darkness was not dust or clouds. It was horses, hundreds of them. Maybe thousands. They moved in a flowing river of muscle and mane that stretched as far as the telescope could show him. But these were not ordinary horses. Even from this distance, Jake could see they were bigger and moved with a grace that seemed to defy the laws of nature. "Sweet Mother of God," Jake whispered. "What is it?" Billy asked. Before Jake could answer, the sound changed. What had been a low rumble became a roar like a flash flood coming down a narrow canyon. The horses were running now and the ground shook like thunder under their hooves. "Get everyone up," Jake shouted down to Mary. "Get them out where they can see this." Jake kept the telescope trained on the approaching herd and felt his mind trying to reject what his eyes were telling him. Some of the horses seemed to shimmer and fade like heat mirages. Others appeared solid one moment and ghostly the next. A few looked like they were made of starlight held together by will and magic. But there was more. Riding on the backs of many of the horses were figures that looked like Running Wolf, tall and lean with copper-colored skin and clothes that moved like living things. They rode without saddles or bridles but seemed perfectly at home on their wild mounts. At the front of the herd, Jake could see a horse that was bigger and blacker than all the others. Even at this distance, there was no mistaking Thunder's powerful build and flowing mane. But the stallion looked different now. His coat seemed to have light moving under it, and his mane and tail streamed behind him like liquid darkness shot through with silver fire. Riding Thunder was a figure that made Jake's heart skip a beat. It was Running Wolf, but not as Jake had seen him dying and broken. This Running Wolf sat tall and proud with no sign of wounds or weakness. He raised his hand toward Haven Ridge in what could only be a greeting. The herd crested the ridge that marked the edge of town, and Jake could finally see the full scope of what was approaching them. The horses filled the valley from side to side in a tide of living power that took his breath away. Some were the size of normal horses, but others were as big as draft animals. A few seemed to be made entirely of light and shadow, while others looked solid enough to touch. But the riders were the most amazing sight of all. Jake counted at least 100 of them scattered throughout the herd. They looked like a war party from the old stories his grandmother had told him. Feathers and war paint and weapons that caught the early morning light. But their eyes held starlight and their movements had a fluid grace that spoke of powers beyond human understanding. The herd slowed as it approached the town and finally came to a stop just outside the main street. The sudden silence was almost as overwhelming as the thunder of hooves had been. Jake could hear people breathing hard and children crying, and somewhere, in the distance, a dog barking at something it did not understand. Thunder walked forward from the mass of horses with Running Wolf still on his back, but as they got closer, Jake could see that something was changing. Running Wolf seemed to be fading like morning mist touched by sunlight. By the time Thunder reached the edge of town, the alien warrior was gone, and the stallion's back was empty. Thunder stopped and turned to look directly up at Jake in the watchtower. The horse's eyes were the same dark brown they had always been, but now they held depths that seemed to go on forever. Thunder tossed his head and called out with a sound that echoed off the hills and seemed to shake the very air. From the herd behind him came an answering call. Not from one horse, but from hundreds. The sound was like nothing Jake had ever heard. It was wild and free and full of power that made his chest tight and his eyes water. It was the sound of spirits given form and ancient promises kept. One of the riders separated from the herd and approached on a mare that seemed to be made of crystallized moonlight. The rider was a woman with long black hair braided with silver and feathers. Her skin was copper-colored like Running Wolf's, but she moved with a fluid grace that spoke of centuries of experience. When she was close enough to be heard without shouting, she raised her hand in greeting and spoke in English. That was clearer and more musical than Running Wolf's had been. "I am Silver Moon of the people of the Thundering Hooves," she said. "I speak for the Star Council and the ancestors who ride the sky paths between worlds." Jake climbed down from the watchtower on shaking legs. The entire population of Haven Ridge had gathered in the street, but they kept back out of respect or fear, or maybe both. Jake walked forward until he was close enough to see the wisdom in Silver Moon's ancient eyes. "You honored our brother with the greatest gift," Silver Moon continued. "You gave freely what was most precious to you. You showed the courage of the old warriors who valued honor above life itself." Jake looked back at Thunder and saw the stallion watching him with what might have been approval. "I did what felt right," Jake said. "But I do not understand what is happening here." Silver Moon smiled, and it was like watching the sun come up over the mountains. "You have called us home, warrior. For the first time in 1,000 years, the people of the Thundering Hooves return to the birth world. The wheel has turned and the old contracts are renewed." She gestured toward the vast herd behind her, and Jake could see that the horses were not all the same. Some looked like Mustangs that might have run wild on the plains a century ago. Others were clearly from other worlds with strange colors and features that hurt to look at directly. But all of them shared the same wild spirit that Thunder had always carried. "These are the spirit horses," Silver Moon explained, "born from the union of flesh and starlight. They carry the souls of warriors who died in battle across 100 worlds. They are weapons and mounts and guardians all in one." Jake felt his knees go weak. "Weapons?" "The Kethvar come from the sky thinking to find easy prey," Silver Moon replied. "They do not know that the Earth children have remembered the old ways. They do not know that the people have returned to ride with their cousins in the final battle." Thunder walked over to Jake and nudged his shoulder gently. The stallion's touch was warm and familiar, but Jake could feel power running through the horse like electricity through a wire. This was still Thunder, but he was also something more now. Something that belonged to both worlds. "The gift has been returned sevenfold as promised," Silver Moon said. "One horse given in honor has brought 1,000. One act of courage has awakened the warrior spirit that sleeps in all true humans. The alliance is forged and the real war begins." Jake looked at the faces of his people and saw wonder and fear and hope all mixed together. They had thought they were alone in a dying world, but now they knew they were part of something bigger, something that spanned the stars and connected them to warriors who had been fighting the darkness since before Earth was born. "What do you need us to do?" Jake asked. Silver Moon's smile became fierce as a winter storm. "Learn to ride the star paths, warrior. Learn to bond with the spirit horses. Learn to carry the thunder of hooves to worlds that have forgotten what freedom sounds like." Silver Moon dismounted from her crystalline mare and walked closer to Jake. Up close he could see that her clothes were not made of any material he recognized. The fabric seemed to shift between buckskin and starlight depending on how the light hit it. Her jewelry was made of stones that held tiny galaxies and metals that hummed with their own inner music. "You have questions," Silver Moon said. "This is good. Warriors who do not ask questions die young and learn nothing." Jake looked back at his people and saw Mary pushing through the crowd. Her face was set in the stubborn expression she got when she was determined to protect everyone, whether they wanted protection or not. "Are you going to explain what is happening here?" Mary demanded. "Yesterday we were barely surviving, and now you are talking about Star Wars and spirit horses like it all makes perfect sense." Silvermoon turned to face Mary, and her expression softened with something that might have been maternal affection. "You are the healer, the one who tends the wounded and speaks for caution. Your people are fortunate to have such a guardian." "Do not try to sweet-talk me," Mary replied. "I want answers, and I want them in plain English." Silvermoon nodded with approval. "Very well. I will tell you the story as it was told to me by the ancestors who learned it from the first writers themselves." She walked to the center of the street where everyone could see and hear her clearly. The spirit horses behind her stood perfectly still, like they understood the importance of what was about to be said. "Long ago, when your world was young, there lived people who understood the bond between human and horse. They knew that some connections go deeper than training or taming. They knew that when the right human meets the right horse, something magical happens that makes both of them more than they could ever be alone." Jake thought about his relationship with Thunder and knew exactly what she meant. These people lived close to the earth and listened to the wind and treated all living things as family. But they were also warriors who would fight to the death to protect what they loved. The first riders saw this and knew they had found something precious and rare. Silvermoon gestured toward the vast herd of spirit horses. The first riders were beings of great wisdom who traveled between the stars in ships that looked like giant eagles. They had been searching the galaxy for people with the warrior spirit strong enough to fight the darkness that was spreading from world to world. "The Kethvar," Jake said. "Yes, but they are not the true enemy. They are servants of something much worse, something that feeds on fear and despair and the death of hope. The first riders called it the night that eats stars." Mary crossed her arms and looked skeptical. "This sounds like mythology, not history," Silvermoon smiled. "What is mythology but history that has been passed down so long people forget it was ever real? Your own people have stories about heroes who rode winged horses and warriors who could speak to animals. Where do you think those stories came from?" She had a point that Jake could not argue with. Every culture on Earth had legends about magical horses and riders who could do impossible things. Maybe they were not just stories after all. "The first riders offered the bravest of the Earth people a choice," Silvermoon continued. "Stay and face the coming darkness alone, or come to the stars and help fight it across the galaxy." Many chose to go. They took their horses and their medicine and their songs. They learned to ride the sky paths and became the people of the thundering hooves. Billy Harper raised his hand like he was in school. "What happened to the ones who stayed behind?" "They forgot," Silvermoon replied sadly. "As generations passed, the stories became legends and the legends became myths. The connection between human and horse became just another part of civilization, instead of the sacred bond it had always been." The warrior spirit went to sleep, waiting for the time when it would be needed again. Jake was starting to understand. The solar flare woke it up. "The great burning forced your people to remember what they had forgotten. You learned to live without the soft things that made you weak. You learned to fight and to sacrifice and to honor the old bonds." When Jake gave thunder to Running Wolf, it was like a bell ringing across the galaxy. The ancestors heard it and knew the time had come. Silvermoon walked over to Thunder and placed her hand on the stallion's neck. The horse nuzzled her palm, and Jake could see light flowing between them like they were old friends meeting after a long separation. "Thunder is not just a horse anymore," Silvermoon explained. "He is the first of a new breed, part earth animal and part star spirit. He can carry a rider between worlds and fight with the power of lightning and storm. But more important, he remembers the old contract between human and horse." "What contract?" Jake asked. "The promise that warriors will care for their mounts and mounts will carry their warriors anywhere they need to go, no matter how dangerous the path. It is a bond sealed in trust and strengthened by shared danger. The Kethvar do not understand this. They see horses as tools to be used and discarded. This is why they always lose in the end." Mary stepped forward, and Jake could see she was starting to believe despite herself. "What do you want from us? What are you asking us to do?" "We ask nothing," Silvermoon replied. "We offer everything. Clean water from the sacred springs, spirit horses for those brave enough to bond with them, knowledge of the star paths and the weapons needed to fight the night that eats stars. But the choice must be freely made. No one will be forced to leave Earth or join the fight." Jake looked around at his people and saw the same mix of fear and hope and wonder that he felt in his own heart. This was the chance they had been waiting for without knowing it. The chance to be part of something bigger than just surviving one more day in a broken world. How does it work? Jake asked. How do we bond with spirit horses? Silvermoon smiled and whistled a complex melody that sounded like wind chimes in a gentle breeze. Several horses separated from the herd and walked forward. Each one was different and beautiful in its own way. A white mare with a mane like flowing water. A red stallion with eyes like glowing coals. A gray gelding that seemed to be made of morning mist. The horses choose their riders, not the other way around, Silvermoon explained. If the bond is meant to be, it will happen naturally. If not, then perhaps your calling lies elsewhere. There is no shame in staying behind to tend the sacred springs and prepare Earth as a sanctuary for those who need healing. Jake watched as the spirit horses moved among his people. Some of the animals showed interest in certain humans, while others walked on by without stopping. The white mare approached Mary and stood perfectly still while the healer reached out with trembling fingers to touch the horse's velvet nose. The moment they made contact, Jake saw a flash of light pass between them. Mary gasped and took a step back, but the mare followed her and rested her chin on Mary's shoulder, like they had been companions for years. I can hear her thoughts, Mary whispered. She is telling me about places where healers are needed. Worlds where the wounded wait for someone who understands both human medicine and horse wisdom. Billy Harper found himself face to face with a young stallion that seemed to be made of crystallized starlight. The horse was barely bigger than a pony, but Jake could see power coiled in its compact frame like lightning waiting to be released. He wants to show me the sky paths, Billy said with wonder in his voice. He wants to teach me to be a messenger between worlds. One by one, Jake watched his people discover connections with horses that seemed impossible, but felt as natural as breathing. Not everyone bonded with a spirit horse, but those who did looked transformed by the experience. They stood straighter and their eyes held new light, like they had remembered something important about themselves. Thunder walked back to Jake and pushed against him with gentle insistence. When Jake put his hand on the stallion's neck, he felt the familiar warmth, but also something new. Images flashed through his mind of distant worlds and battles fought among the stars. He saw Kethvar armies and the warriors who stood against them. He saw hope and despair and the eternal struggle between light and darkness. You understand now, Silvermoon said. This is not just about Earth or humanity. This is about the future of all life in the galaxy. The night that eats stars grows stronger every year. If it is not stopped soon, there will be no worlds left where freedom and beauty can survive. Jake looked at Thunder and saw his own reflection in the horse's dark eyes. But he also saw something else. He saw the warrior he could become if he had the courage to accept what was being offered. When do we start? Jake asked. Silvermoon's smile was fierce and proud. The war has already begun, warrior. The question is not when, but how quickly you can learn to fight among the stars while keeping your feet rooted in the sacred earth of your birth. The sun was fully up now, and its light revealed details that Jake had missed in the gray dawn. Some of the spirit horses cast no shadows. Others left hoofprints that glowed with their own inner fire. A few seemed to exist in several dimensions at once, shifting between solid and ethereal like dreams given form. This was the beginning of something that would change not just Haven Ridge, but the entire galaxy. Jake could feel it in his bones and in the warm pulse of Thunder's heartbeat under his hand. The real adventure was just beginning. The Kethvar attack came 3 days later, just as the sun was setting behind the western mountains. Jake had been working with Thunder to understand their new bond when the alarm bell started ringing from the watchtower. Billy Harper's voice carried across the settlement, sharp with panic. Ships coming in from the north. Lots of them. Jake swung up onto Thunder's back and felt the stallion's muscles bunch with power that went far beyond what any normal horse should possess. They raced toward the watchtower while Silvermoon and her warriors prepared for battle with the calm efficiency of people who had been fighting this war for centuries. Through the telescope, Jake could see the Kethvar fleet approaching like a swarm of angry wasps. The ships were dark and twisted, looking as if they had been grown rather than built. Green light leaked from their hulls, and he could see weapon ports opening like hungry mouths ready to feed on destruction. How many? Silvermoon asked as she rode up beside him on her crystalline mare. 20 ships, maybe more, Jake replied. Bigger than anything they have sent before. Silvermoon nodded grimly. They bring a harvest fleet. They do not come just to raid this time. They come to strip your world bare and leave nothing but bones and ash. The lead Kethvar ship began broadcasting in the clicking, chittering language of the insect-like aliens. Jake did not understand the words, but the meaning was clear enough. Surrender or be destroyed. Submit or watch everything you love burn. They offer you one chance to live as slaves, Silvermoon translated. They say humans who cooperate will be allowed to work in the feeding pens until they are too old to be useful. Jake felt Thunder's anger as if it was his own. The stallion pawed the ground and sparks flew from his hooves like he was striking flint against steel. Around them, the spirit horses were showing their own reactions to the alien threat. Some glowed brighter while others seemed to fade into shadow. All of them radiated a fury that made the air itself feel dangerous. "What do we tell them?" Jake asked. Silvermoon smiled, and it was terrible and beautiful, like lightning splitting a dark sky. "We tell them nothing with words. We speak in the old language that all warriors understand." She raised her hand and the spirit horses began to move. They did not charge forward in a wild rush like normal cavalry might. Instead, they spread out and began to flow around Haven Ridge in patterns that seemed random, but felt purposeful. Jake could see they were taking positions, but he did not understand what kind of battle formation they were creating. "Stay close to me," Silvermoon told Jake. "Thunder knows what to do, but you are still learning the sky paths. Trust your mount and do not think too much about what seems impossible." The Kethvar ships descended until they hovered just above the desert floor. Ramps extended from their bellies and alien warriors began pouring out in organized formations. Jake counted at least 200 of the creatures and more were still coming. They moved on 6 legs like giant insects and their green armor gleamed with its own sick light. The Kethvar leader was bigger than the others with elaborate decorations that marked him as high-ranking. He raised a weapon that looked like it had been carved from black bone and fired a beam of searing energy that turned a section of desert sand into glass. A warning shot to show the humans what would happen if they resisted. That was when Thunder decided the talking was over. The stallion screamed a challenge that echoed off the hills and charged straight at the alien battle line. Jake held on tight and tried not to think about the fact that they were riding into weapons that could vaporize them both in seconds. But Thunder was no longer just a horse. As they galloped forward, Jake felt the world blur and shift around them. One moment they were on solid ground, and the next, they seemed to be riding through space itself with stars streaming past like bright tears. The Kethvar weapons fired, but the energy beams passed through empty air. Where Thunder had been a heartbeat before, they materialized in the middle of the alien formation, and Jake felt Thunder's hooves strike the Kethvar leader with the force of a lightning bolt. The alien's armor cracked like an egg and green fluid sprayed across the sand. Before the other creatures could react, Thunder was gone again, dancing between dimensions like smoke in the wind. All around them, the other spirit horses were doing the same thing. They would appear long enough to strike and then vanish before the aliens could target them. Mary rode her white mare through the enemy ranks, healing wounds on humans, while trampling Kethvar warriors under hooves that burned like white fire. Billy and his Starlight Stallion moved so fast they seemed to be in 3 places at once, spreading confusion and fear among the alien troops, but the real shock was seeing ordinary humans from Haven Ridge fighting alongside the spirit horses. People who had never been in a real battle were moving with the coordination of seasoned warriors. They fought with weapons that appeared in their hands when needed and disappeared when the danger passed. They rode horses that could walk on air and strike with the power of falling stars. Jake realized this was what Silvermoon had meant about the warrior spirit awakening. These people were not just farmers and traders anymore. They were becoming something their ancestors would have recognized. They were becoming the kind of humans who had once ridden with Crazy Horse and Geronimo across the endless plains. The Kethvar tried to retreat to their ships but found the way blocked by spirit horses that had somehow gotten behind them without being seen. The aliens clustered together in defensive circles and fired wildly at targets that refused to stay in one place long enough to be hit. Green energy beams crisscrossed the battlefield, but most of them struck nothing but empty air or each other. Jake and Thunder appeared next to the largest Kethvar ship, and the stallion kicked out with his hind legs. Instead of just denting metal, the impact sent cracks of silver fire racing across the hull. The ship's systems began failing, and it crashed to the ground in a shower of sparks and alien screaming. The battle was over in less than an hour. The Kethvar, who were not dead or wounded, had fled back to their ships and escaped into the night sky. Those who remained were in no condition to threaten anyone. Jake climbed down from Thunder's back and looked around at what had once been a hopeless fight between desperate humans and superior alien technology. Instead, he saw something that would have made his grandmother proud. He saw free people who had remembered what it meant to fight for something worth dying for. He saw humans and horses working together with a bond that transcended species and connected them to something eternal. But Silvermoon's expression was troubled as she surveyed the battlefield. "This was too easy," she said. "The Kethvar do not give up so quickly when they bring a harvest fleet." Jake was about to ask what she meant when the ground began to shake again. But this was different from the trembling that had announced the arrival of the spirit horses. This felt wrong. It felt like something vast and hungry stirring to life beneath their feet. The ships were just a distraction, Silvermoon realized. While we fought above ground, they were doing something. Below, the shaking intensified, and cracks appeared in the earth around Haven Ridge. Green light began seeping up through the fissures, and Jake could smell something, like rotting flowers mixed with burning metal. Whatever the Kethvar had planted or awakened, it was big enough to threaten not just the settlement, but possibly the entire region. Thunder reared up on his hind legs and screamed another challenge, but this time the sound carried notes of fear along with anger. The stallion could sense something rising from the depths that was older and more dangerous than anything they had faced before. "The night that eats stars," Silvermoon whispered. "They have awakened one of its servants. They would rather destroy your world than let us use it as a sanctuary." Jake looked at his people and saw the same determination in their eyes that had carried them through years of hardship and loss. They had tasted victory and remembered what it felt like to be strong. They would not give up now, no matter what came crawling out of the earth to challenge them. "Then we fight it," Jake said simply. "Whatever it is, we fight it with everything we have." Silvermoon nodded and raised her hand to signal the other spirit riders. "The real test begins now," she said. "Everything that came before was just practice. Now we find out if the alliance between Earth and the Star Riders is strong enough to face the darkness that devours worlds." The cracks in the ground widened, and something vast and terrible began to emerge. The final battle for Earth was about to begin. What came out of the earth was nothing like the Kethvar warriors they had fought above ground. It was huge and dark and seemed to be made of shadow given form and hunger. Tentacles thick as tree trunks writhed from its central mass, while eyes like burning coals opened and closed along its flanks. When it spoke, the sound came from everywhere at once, like the voice of nightmares made real. "I am the devourer of light," it said in words that bypassed the ears and spoke directly to the soul. "I have eaten the songs of 1,000 worlds. I will swallow your hope and leave only emptiness where your spirits used to live." Jake felt thunder tremble beneath him, but the stallion did not retreat. If anything, the horse seemed to grow larger and more solid, as if drawing strength from the very presence of their enemy. Around them, the other spirit horses were doing the same thing. Light began to flow between them, creating patterns that hurt to look at directly, but somehow made Jake feel stronger and more confident. "You cannot defeat what you do not understand," Silvermoon called to the creature. "We are not just warriors fighting for one world. We are the voice of everything that chooses light over darkness. We are the song that darkness cannot silence." The devourer laughed, and the sound made the ground crack and buildings shake. "I have heard that song on 100 worlds before I ate them. It always ends the same way, in screaming and silence and the sweet taste of despair." Jake felt something stirring inside him that had nothing to do with fear. It was the same feeling he had gotten when he decided to give thunder to Running Wolf. The feeling that some choices mattered more than safety or survival. Some moments defined not just who you were, but who you could become. He looked at his people and saw the same realization in their faces. They were no longer just refugees trying to survive in a broken world. They were part of something bigger. They were the children of warriors who had once ridden free across endless plains. They were the inheritors of courage that had been passed down through generations like a sacred fire. "Thunder," Jake said quietly. "Show them what we learned from the ancestors." The stallion reared up and called out with a sound that seemed to contain all the wild music of wind and storm and running water. The other spirit horses answered, and their combined voices created harmonies that made the air itself sing with power. This was not just a battle cry. This was the sound of freedom refusing to be conquered. The devourer struck first, sending tentacles racing across the ground toward the assembled riders. But the spirit horses were ready. They rose into the air on hooves of condensed starlight and began to weave between the attacks like dancers performing an ancient ritual. Their movements were not random. They were creating a pattern that Jake recognized from the designs he had seen on Running Wolf's clothes and weapons. The medicine wheel, Silver Moon called out. The sacred circle that connects all living things. Hold the pattern and do not let it break no matter what happens. Jake guided Thunder into his position in the great wheel and felt power flowing through him like electricity through copper wire. He could sense the other riders taking their places and the connections forming between them. Human and horse, earthborn and star-touched, all united in purpose and bound together by something stronger than fear. The devourer seemed to sense what they were doing, and its attacks became more desperate. It sent waves of darkness rolling across the desert trying to blind and confuse the riders. It whispered promises of easy death if they would just stop fighting and accept the inevitable. It showed them visions of other worlds that had fallen and the futility of resistance. But the wheel held. Jake felt Mary's determination as she healed wounds faster than they could be inflicted. He sensed Billy's joy as the young man discovered he could ride patterns of pure light between the stars. He shared the fierce pride of the old-timers who had lived through the solar flare and refused to give up hope, even when everything seemed lost. Now, Silver Moon commanded, all together, show this creature what the united voice of the free can accomplish. The spirit horses began to spin the medicine wheel faster and faster, until they became a blur of light and motion that seemed to exist in multiple dimensions at once. At the center of the pattern, Thunder and Jake held steady, while energy built around them like a storm waiting to break. Jake could feel the power of every person who had ever chosen courage over safety. Every warrior who had ridden into battle knowing they might not return. Every parent who had sacrificed for their children. Every dreamer who had refused to let hope die even in the darkest times. It was all there in the spinning wheel of light waiting to be released. The devourer realized its danger and tried to retreat back into the earth, but it was too late. The medicine wheel had become a lens that focused all the scattered light of the galaxy into a single burning point of pure creation. When that light touched the creature of shadow, it did not destroy it so much as transform it. The darkness began to crack and fall away like old paint peeling from a wall. Underneath was something that might once have been beautiful before hunger and hatred twisted it into a monster. For just a moment, Jake thought he saw what it had been before it chose to devour light instead of creating its own. Then it was gone, not destroyed but transformed back into the scattered energy from which all things are born. The cracks in the earth sealed themselves and the green glow faded to be replaced by the clean light of stars. Jake climbed down from Thunder's back and looked around at his people. They were changed by what they had experienced. Some would choose to go to the stars with Silver Moon and her warriors. Others would stay on Earth to tend the sacred springs and prepare the world as a sanctuary for refugees from the cosmic war. But all of them knew they were part of something larger now. They were connected to every world where the free fought against those who would devour freedom. They were links in a chain of light that stretched across the galaxy, binding together all who chose hope over despair. 5 years later, Jake stood on the same ridge where he had first seen the Kethvar ships approaching. But the view was very different now. The desert bloomed with green plants and clear streams that flowed from springs the ancestors had blessed before they went to the stars. Haven Ridge had grown into a city that welcomed refugees from across the galaxy and taught them to bond with spirit horses. Jake himself traveled between worlds now. Sometimes he rode Thunder across the restored plains of Earth, helping other settlements learn the old ways. Sometimes he rode the star paths to distant battlefields where the war against the night that eats stars continued to rage. The horse had become legendary across the galaxy. Children on 100 worlds sang songs about Thunder the Earth Horse, who had carried his rider to victory against the devourer of light. But to Jake, he was still just Thunder. Still the same steady companion who had shared his water and trusted his judgment and never let him down. "Ready for another journey?" Jake asked as he checked the stallion's tack. Thunder turned his head and looked at Jake with eyes that held starlight and ancient wisdom and just a hint of mischief. The horse was ready for anything. They had places to go and people to help in a galaxy full of worlds where the thunder of free hooves had never been heard. Jake swung into the saddle and felt the familiar warmth of Thunder's powerful body beneath him. Around them, other riders were preparing for their own journeys. Mary would take her healing skills to a world where plague threatened to wipe out an entire species. Billy would carry messages between star systems where communication had been cut by enemy action. Silver Moon would lead a strike against a Kethvar stronghold that had been enslaving children from peaceful worlds. But they would all return to Earth eventually. This was their sanctuary and their strength. This was the world that had remembered what it meant to be free and taught that lesson to the stars themselves. Thunder spread wings that were made of condensed lightning and starfire. They rose into the sky where other spirit horses waited to join them in patterns that would carry them between worlds faster than thought. Below them, Earth turned green and blue and beautiful, in the light of its yellow sun. The thunder of hooves echoed across 1,000 worlds as the people of the thundering hooves rode out to bring hope to places where darkness had seemed victorious. They carried with them the wild spirit of the American frontier, and the unbreakable bond between human and horse that had proven stronger than any weapon the enemies of freedom could devise. The war was far from over, but the balance had shifted. The night that eats stars had learned that there were some lights it could not swallow, some songs it could not silence, some spirits that would burn bright forever no matter how much darkness tried to smother them. Jake Morrison had given one horse to honor a dying warrior. In return, he had received an army of stellar Mustangs and helped humanity take its place among the stars not as conquerors but as guardians of the wild free spirit that no amount of civilization could ever completely tame. The thunder rolled on, across the galaxy, carrying the message that freedom would always find a way to survive and grow and fight back against those who would chain it.